This is Kevin Conroy, the voice of Batman.
This is Lauren Lester, the voice of Robin and Nightwing.
And you're listening to the DCAU Review.
Hosted by Cal and Liam.
Streaming at DCAUreview.com.
And on your favorite podcast app.
Welcome, everybody, to episode 327 of the DCAU Review. I am one of your hosts, Cal. With me, my good friend and good brother, is Liam. Liam, we are continuing in our countdown here of the final episodes of the original Batman the Animated Series run, as we are down to the final two, and this week is a pretty memorable one, and we once again will be joined by a very special guest correspondent for the episode.
That's right, Cal. We're talking about a long time coming, the return of Mr. Freeze and the aptly titled Deep Freeze, the penultimate episode of the series, at least in production order.
You've been waiting 326 episodes to say penultimate.
Why do a podcast if you don't ever get to say the word penultimate to show how big your vocabulary is?
Indeed. Love that for us.
But yes, as mentioned, we'll also be joined in a little bit by director of this episode and frequent guest correspondent on our show over the years. We're happy to have Mr. Kevin Altieri back with us this week.
Not necessarily his last appearance, but his last episode that he directed for the series. So,
right.
We jumped at the opportunity to see if we could get Kevin on. He was kind enough to join us, so we'll be throwing to ourselves in the future past in just a few minutes here when we get into our discussion about the visuals and animation portion of the episode for lots more than just visual and animation talk with Kevin, but we will get there when we get there. But before we do, we, of course, we'll get the official IMDb synopsis for this week's episode, which originally aired here in the States on the Fox Kids programming block on November the 26th, 1994, meaning we are coming up here on the 30th anniversary of this episode's debut just here in a few months at the original time of recording. And, of course, before we get that official IMDb synopsis, we will, of course, remind the good folks at home that it is brought to you by The Pod Tower. Head over to youtube.com/thepodtower today and subscribe. And not only can you get our entire catalog, which includes all prior episodes, 326, plus bonus episodes and spin-off episodes and everything else that we've included in our library, you also get the original review of Heart of Ice, if you want to check that out, which is obviously the prequel to this episode. Not only do you get that, but you get the entire Tim Talk podcast library, which also heavily covered the entire DCAU and the ongoing series from the Watchtower database, Jump on the Batwagon, which also, believe it or not, talks about the DCAU. So for all your DCAU podcast needs, head over to youtube.com/thepodtower and subscribe today.
That's right, so this is the synopsis for Deep Freeze, which is written by Paul Dini and Bruce Timm, never heard of him, directed by Kevin Altieri, music by Shirley Walker, and animation by Dong Yang, and that synopsis reads as such. An elderly amusement park owner breaks Mr. Freeze out of jail, hoping to be frozen like him in order to achieve immortality.
Yeah, I mean, it's fine.
That about covers it.
Pronouns are the only thing there. And to be frozen by him, like him.
Yes.
Speaking of Mr. Freeze.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Very cool. So we can jump into our own plot synopsis of this episode, Liam, as we open things up with a scene at what I assume is it ever declared? It's not Arkham, right? Is it Stonegate? Do we know what prison this is?
I'm trying to remember. There's like the exterior shot of Batman watching him at the end of Heart of Ice, but I don't. It's definitely not Arkham, because Arkham. I think it's Stonegate because they're the one. It's like the big castle that has like the walls up high, because that's like where he goes and investigates the Penguin in the one episode.
That's what it reminded me of, with the bars on the windows.
So yeah, I think he is decidedly not in, and he's not in trial either. So we can assume he's not.
Good point.
In Arkham at this point, at least.
So either way, it's the exterior of some sort of incarceration facility. And there we see a bit of a disturbance as a giant robot begins walking out of the water towards the prison, breaking through the razor wire. The guards and alarms are all going off. They start opening fire. Very interestingly, something maybe that we'll talk about with Kevin, is that there's no dialogue here for like the first 2 minutes other than the guards shouting, sound the alarm and open fire. But no other descriptor other than we see that this robot is walking through walls and breaking through to break into the facility. We then do get a cut to Mr. Freeze, Victor Freeze, in fact, who is sitting in his cell. One of the disturbances awakens him as things begin to explode and go off, causing the ground to shake. This also causes his little snow globe that has the dancer in it that is sort of his homage and tribute to his dear wife Nora. That begins to go off. And he peeks outside and notices the disturbance, commenting to no one in particular that it's interesting. And then, before you know it, the robot has climbed the side of the building and is peeking his way into Freeze's containment cell. Mr. Freeze, very panicked, calls for the guard, but unfortunately the robot breaks in and makes off with him. And that's where we cut to the Batcave, where Batman, Robin, and Alfred are standing by watching the surveillance video from the facility. Robin remarks that he gives Freeze credit for having the most unique breakout of the year so far, but Batman, also being the detective that he is, remarks that Freeze was clearly in terror and fear for his life as he was being abducted, and doesn't believe that he was behind his own abduction. So they believe that there's something afoot here, noting that the robot used was probably the biggest clue that they had, and that Robin decides that they need to seek out their own robotics expert. And Liam, that's when we get to see an old friend, none other than Carl Rossum making his return. So we had not seen Mr. Rossum in quite some time. Last seen in Heart of Steel.
His Silicon Soul.
Right, that's right. His Silicon. He does make
Robot Batman shows up to.
He
ask
does.
for help.
We saw him in a greenhouse there.
That's right.
He's a gardener.
He's a plant guy, and he's also a toy maker now, I think.
That's right. Batman and Robin are greeted at the door by a robot that certainly appears to homage one of the most classically annoying Batman characters ever created, Liam.
That's right. We get Batmite's one and only DCAU appearance. That being a robotic version of him, as you said, who's lives up to the name, being a very obnoxious, fluttering around, shouting, and keeps repeating that he just wants to help. Which was sort of a refrain of the Batmite character in those Dick Sprang era Batman comics, for sure.
Greetings, dynamic duo. I'm your biggest fan.
What is it?
I just want to help. Just want to help. Just want to help.
Poor little critter. I never could get his programming right.
Cute toy, Carl.
You know I'm out of the robot business, Batman. All I make anymore are little friends to keep me company.
Like Tiny here?
Well, if it isn't old M9.
It's one of yours?
Not really. I once created a smaller prototype for Grant Walker.
The guy who builds those theme parks?
Yeah, I was one of Walker's original Visioneers, constructing and programming the animatronic figures he used in his park attractions. Though it looks like old Grant's boys pumped up the design a bit.
I'm wondering how improved these robots are, and why one of them was sent to kidnap Mr. Freeze.
And, so they decide that they're going to go try to pay this Grant Walker a visit. And where is he located? Well, thankfully the next scene tells us, as we see Mr. Freeze arrive, still confused as to where he is, as we're introduced to Mr. Walker, who tells Mr. Freeze that he's got a proposition for him, and he quickly gets him outfitted in his old costume, or a replica of his old costume, as I think they clarify. I don't know why that's important. Why couldn't he just gotten the suit out of storage or whatever? He's a billionaire. But whatever. He made a new one. I guess it's more impressive that he built an exact replica.
He's an inventor. They want you to know how either he or the people that he employs are so their attention to detail is very important here.
That's right. So as Freeze tests out his new ice gun on one of the robots nearby, we begin to understand the sort of sales pitch that Grant Walker has for him. He tells him that he's accomplished a great deal in his life, but he has so much more to do, and he's an old man and he's running out of time, so he's a little bit afraid of his own mortality.
Just hear me out, please. As I said, I've studied you and your work. Do you realize that in your frozen state you'll age much slower than an ordinary human? You're practically immortal, my friend.
Yes, eternal life trapped in this wretched shell. What a miserable joke.
Oh, miserable to you, but a godsend to me. Look at me, Mr. Freeze. I'm an old man. I've created wonders in my lifetime, but there is still so much to do. I want to change as you have, to become, like you, a being of blessed eternal cold.
You're insane.
Only you have the know-how to duplicate the accident that made you what you are. But I long to become.
And based on the research, he mentions that, as we find out in a moment here, he was a heavy investor in GothCorp, so he's very much aware of the accident that turned Mr. Freeze into what he is today, and notes that because of what it did to his physiology, yes, he's trapped in the suit, but he's also slowed his aging down to a crawl, if at all, which has allowed him to theoretically be immortal. And Freeze is quick to point out the caveats that come with this immortality, and initially sort of denies Walker when Walker asks him to repeat the experiments and accidents that created it on Walker. But at that point, it kind of becomes clear he's not really asking Mr. Freeze for help. He has a certain bargaining chip as a curtain lifts, and we see a woman floating in a mysterious vat of blue that we clearly discover is Victor's thought-to-be-dead wife, Nora, or maybe she is supposed to be dead here, but they don't explicitly say that.
I want to live like this, abandoned and alone, a prisoner in a world you can see but never touch. Old and infirm as you are, I'd trade 1,000 of my frozen years for your worst day.
Actually, I had another kind of swap in mind.
Nora.
I was a major investor in GothCorp a few years back and put up some money for their cryogenics program. I trust you know the young lady behind the glass.
My wife.
The GothCorp execs think she perished in the fire, but my men got her out. I have the technology to restore her, my friend. All you have to do is grant my wish.
Very well.
And he claims that not only was he able to smuggle her out of GothCorp, but that he has the technology to restore her to life, and he will do that so long as Mr. Freeze plays ball, so to speak. So from there, it seems he has him at a little bit of a stalemate. He agrees to help, and there Batman and Robin arrive in this futuristic city of Oceana that he's built. And as they arrive there, well, first the Batboat almost gets destroyed, or does get destroyed, and thankfully they're able to escape in the nick of time. Some robot sharks, hate those. I guess it's better than the 60s show where they just filled an actual dolphin with dynamite.
That's true.
Or an actual shark with dynamite and made it like Batman.
You have to think that the irony of Batman fighting a shark in this bit is some
right.
sort of homage or nod to
there's no repellent spray, but
right.
there's some sharks, exploding sharks coming after them. They're just able to escape and sneak their way into the city, where we see Grant Walker giving his State of Oceana address on this giant TV.
Very 1984.
Right, to all the Disney adults, Walker adults that are that are standing in their already, like, they're all in uniforms and they're all being addressed in this sort of town square. And here's where we get Grant Walker's sort of pitch for what Oceana is. It's not just a theme park.
It's some might say he has a bit of a manifesto, I would say, to deliver here.
Yeah.
If you've ever watched the Apple Computer commercial, very famous Apple Computer 1984, based on the 1984 book
Right.
by...
Or seen the actual movie or read the book.
Yeah. You'll know and recognize some of the imagery that's used here. Grant Walker is giving all the details about what his plan is going to be, and while he says to the outside world they think that he's just built another theme park, that really he's built the perfect new city.
Welcome, friends. Thanks to all our hard work, Oceana's nearly up and running. Now, while most folks believe Oceana's just another theme park, we know better. Fact of the matter is, it's not too nice out there anymore. Crime, hatred, violence, things keep going on like that. It could mean the end of civilization. That's why I decided to build a city where good folks can live in peace. A new Garden of Eden, you might say, from which a new race of people can spring. Now, of course, you can't have spring without a little winter. About 5 years of it, I'd say. Now, don't anybody worry. We'll all be warm as toast in here. As for those folks outside, well, it's sad, but I'm only speeding up what they were doing to themselves.
And they're going to, his words, create a brand new race of humanity. Yeah, no subtext here in his plans. But yes, also no subtext to the man that he's a supposed pastiche of. Here, not just all coincidental. Okay,
of course.
These are all coincidental things. You're reading into this. Don't read into anything. But yeah, so as he's delivering his monologue to the watching people of Oceana, he notes that unfortunately part of this bringing this new spring of humanity to the world is going to involve creating a winter outside of Oceana, where he's basically going to send the rest of the world into an ice age for an extended period of time. I believe he says 5 years or something like that. So he's going to kill the rest of the planet, but everybody in Oceana will be safe and warm as toast, as he says. It's at this point that as Batman and Robin are milling about, they're sort of beginning their reconnaissance. They're watching and listening to this as well. They're discovered by a series of robots, surveillance robots that Walker has around. Despite putting up a bit of a fight, it's a bit too much for Batman and Robin as they're ultimately captured and brought in by the robots, frozen together as they can just kind of sit and watch as Walker declares victory at this point, noting that his ice cannon is fully functional. He and his first in command go off to begin the process of freezing the rest of the world with the ice cannon, inviting Freeze along, but Freeze notes that he's not interested. He just wants to stay there with Nora. This gives the opportunity for Batman to appeal to Freeze.
You can't let Walker do this. Billions of people will perish.
That's not my concern. All that matters is I once again have my wife and the means to restore her.
She'll wake up in a dead, frozen world that you helped destroy. She'll hate you for that.
Silence.
You think you're alone now? Wait until she learns the truth.
I said silence!
And it's this that breaks through the frozen chill heart of Mr. Freeze as he realizes that Batman may indeed have a point. He breaks Batman and Robin out of their bonds and invites them to come take on Walker as we head to our third and final act of the episode. As Walker and his... did we talk about Walker actually going through the transformation?
Yeah, that happens right after Batman and Robin get captured. He invites them to watch as... It seems pretty simple. Like, before there was a whole thing where it was like he got knocked into a tube and the tube broke and all these chemicals fell on him. They just kind of inject Walker with a bunch of stuff.
They put him in a
and then
Mr.
the bubble
Freeze
turns blue.
Right.
His helmet the inside of his helmet turns blue, and he's Mr. He's Mr. Freeze too now.
He gets his own custom Mr. Freeze suit, by
That's
the
right.
way, which is great. He's got the tubes around the arms and legs too. So he gets his own version of that. But yes, Walker is transformed. That's an important part here, is he gets his wish for immortality at this point. And now that he has been granted immortality, he's going to wipe out billions of people on the planet and then begin creating this master race. So he and his first in command go off to launch the cannon. As we mentioned, Mr. Freeze is swayed eventually by Batman to help them stop Walker. As they go and the cannon is about to launch, Mr. Freeze interrupts it. There is a fight that occurs. Robots pop up, the same robots that captured Mr. Freeze and kidnapped him and brought him to Oceana are back. So they begin taking on Freeze. Batman, Robin, and Freeze all teaming up together. Mr. Freeze is able to overpower Walker, stop the cannon from launching, and then as Walker is sitting there frozen watching, Mr. Freeze overloads the main reactor, which causes a chain reaction that's going to decimate all of Oceana. So at this point, Batman and Robin and the rest of Oceana have to evacuate. Mr. Freeze does do the human thing and announces over the big telescreen to tell everybody to get out because of the impending destruction. It appears that there are boats that are leaving. This is out in the middle of the ocean, thus the name Oceana. There's an evacuation that occurs just as everybody is leaving. Batman and Robin are about to leave. Walker, by the way, is frozen completely in an ice cube up against one of the vats, seemingly left to die by Mr. Freeze. Batman and Robin and Mr. Freeze are all about to escape and jump on one of the boats when Mr. Freeze says that he's going to stay there because he needs to stay with Nora. Batman tells him it's a lost cause, that he needs to come with them. He tries his best to tie Mr. Freeze up and bring him unwillingly with them.
Here's our ride.
Let's go.
I'm staying with Nora.
Don't be a fool. This whole place is going under.
I won't lose her again.
There's nothing you can do for her. Come with us.
I am the least of your worries.
Robin!
Take the boy and go.
Batman picks up Robin, gets on one of the ocean liners to escape the imploding Oceana, and Mr. Freeze goes back in to be with his Nora as the main reactor overloads, and we see a giant explosion of Oceana as it begins. Parts of it begin sinking into the ocean. We do see Grant Walker in a bit of an iceberg, sinking iceberg, float to the bottom of the ocean as a fish swims past his face, and he screams, though no one can hear him. And that's where we kind of get our epilogue, as we see what happens to Robin and Mr. Freeze. That's
right. So they're back at one of those other like side rooms in the Batcave we don't see very often. The anti-ice wing or whatever. So
it's the thing from The Empire Strikes Back.
Exactly.
That Luke uses
the Bacta tank. Yeah.
After getting attacked by the Wampa.
Absolutely. So Dick is getting out of the tank, or has gotten out of the tank, and talks about how long he had been in there, and he sort of asks Batman if he thinks that's the end of Mr. Freeze. Though Batman theorizes that if he is indeed immortal, that he could still pop up once again. And just to drive that home, we cut back out to the harbor where all of these floating icebergs, the remains of Oceana, are still floating, and we see one moving through the water. And as we look inside, we see that we see Nora still preserved in her tank, floating there with Mr. Freeze on his knees in front of it, looking up at her, and he places his hand on the tank to illustrate that he still is. Still with her, even in this quiet moment as they fade to black here. So, Mr. Freeze is still alive. Will he ever come back? Yeah,
but that's a story for at least another couple months from now.
That's right. We'll get to that down the road. But that's where our episode wraps up. This episode's weird, man. It has some interesting elements, like the evil Walt Disney. If you didn't notice that, yeah, is interesting. as a way to bring back Mr. Freeze, it's interesting. But then the episode, it almost kind of feels like a like Batman and Robin are like a James Bond. Like there's a crazy billionaire that's trying to blow up the world, and he's got a magic death ray, and you've got to sneak inside to figure out what's going on, and then you get captured, and like it has kind of an old like, I don't know, adventure novel feel to it.
Yeah.
The idea being that he's gonna shoot a giant freeze ray at the Earth is kind of silly to me. But
if you think about it too much.
Also, like, how long do ice ages last? Like, I think it's more than 5 years.
Probably.
But maybe this is a different type of, because it's not a naturally occurring ice age, so maybe that's just how long it would take this ice to melt. I don't know. Also, then all of the vegetation and animals are dead. How do you eat?
Right.
How do you farm the lands? Like, then who's in charge of cleaning up all the corpses that are left from all the dead frozen people? A lot of questions being raised here. More questions than answers that do we get from Mr. Walker. But like, it's a fun enough little episode. It's fun to see Mr. Freeze. Obviously, it's kind of a mammoth deal in episodes that follow this and movies that follow this about furthering Mr. Freeze. You introduce that Nora is still alive and all that. So, like, it's a pretty seminal episode for what comes after it. But, like, as a standalone episode, I'm like, this is just kind of a weird little episode, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. So, it's been a very long time since we talked about Heart of Ice. Mm-hmm. But that episode, obviously, is arguably the best episode of Batman the Animated Series.
Right.
Arguably the best episode of the DCAU. Arguably the best animated written episode of anything ever.
Emmy winning.
Yeah, so... And the reason why... After talking to, or in interviews with Bruce Timm, Paul Dini, and the Alan Burnett and the show creators, why they waited to not bring back, or they didn't necessarily want to bring back Mr. Freeze, was because that episode was so perfect in that it sort of encapsulated that character. So doing a sequel, it's like, if you do Godfather 2, is it gonna be as good as Godfather 1? We don't know.
Right.
In that case, many people do think Godfather 2 is better than Godfather 1. But then you also have, if you do, the sequel to this movie, is it gonna be... That's the modern Hollywood thing. It's like, if we do a sequel, is it gonna be as good as is it gonna be as great?
Right.
And it's really hard to follow up perfection.
Yeah.
The amount of times, as we just pointed out with The Godfather, that it actually happens that you're able to execute a perfect sequel or something that's received even more so than the original, kind of slim to none. Godfather 2, Empire Strikes Back, like those are the exceptions to the rule. So it was a risk. I think that if you were going to do it, this certainly allowed them to expand upon... Because, honestly, with the way that you ended Heart of Ice, there wasn't really any place for Mr. Freeze to go.
Right.
Like, he wasn't going to get his vengeance. He got sent to jail. Is he going to... You could write another story where he comes out and still tries to get vengeance against GothCorp, or,
Right.
But... you're just repeating the same story trope. So you had to do something a little bit different. Big swing. Yeah, you went like completely unrealistic though in this way. Like, you took some real life elements, but that, like you said, you added this giant ice cannon, and it's a world-ending threat as opposed to this guy who's trying to kill one billionaire. It's a billionaire trying to kill the world.
Yes.
So yeah, I don't know that this episode needed to be done. With that said, you can take that out and say, well, we would never have gotten the follow-ups to this. What comes in the new Batman Adventures, his tragic ending in Batman Beyond, which we've also covered, which is one of my favorite episodes of all of the DCAU also. So it's necessary. It was necessary to get there, and it certainly builds upon and gives a good foundation for what needed to come. So I think I can step aside, however, and say, as far as the story, yep, it's fantastical. It's kind of goofy.
Sure.
But you still were able to keep Mr. Freeze sort of neutral and not make him he's not the Joker, he's not the Riddler, he's not the Penguin.
He's not robbing banks.
Right.
Or...
He didn't turn to a life of crime. His motivation remained the same. He's obsessed with trying to get his wife back. And if you said, well, what if his wife wasn't actually dead and there was somebody that blackmailed him into giving up this thing that he regards as a curse, as immortality, in order to, do this. And then ultimately at the end, it's revealed that he's really not a bad person. He has a conscience. Batman is able to appeal to that conscience, even if it's through the motivation of his love for his wife.
Right.
So I'm kind of back and forth. I was back and forth on what I should.
Sure.
I think the execution of the episode is good. It didn't need to happen, but I think the execution for what they went with, while having silly bits here and there, I think was executed well. I settled on a 7 out of 10 for the score. I think the episode has good pacing. I don't think there's any point that it feels like it's dragging. It doesn't feel like you're, waiting for a whole bunch of action. There isn't a ton of action, I guess, when you think about it. Mm-hmm. You have these mini kind of like temporary fights between Batman and the robots, or Batman's in the Batboat trying to escape the sharks. Like, these are kind of our little action beats here. So it's not a lot of hand-to-hand combat, but it doesn't feel it didn't feel boring to me, at least for the majority of the episode. So yeah, I went with 7 out of 10. What about you?
Yeah, I went just 1 point lower. I went 6 out of 10. I like it. It's, like I said, it's a fun sort of whack. Like I said, it feels very off the beaten path for this series. Like, this would feel very much at home in, like, this could have been a Justice League episode.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
Because by that point, things are so blown out, and there's aliens and magic and all this stuff. So a crazy billionaire who tries to blow up the world or freeze the world, that works.
Right.
So I think it feels a little more like a hard left turn because it's in this original series still, even in these later Adventures of Batman and Robin seasons.
Sure.
But yeah, I think it's interesting. I like the beats of Batman appealing to him through, like, you claim everything you've ever done is that all the bad things you've done were for your wife.
Right.
She would not let you, like, she would never forgive you for doing this. I think that's a really interesting way of how he kind of breaks through to him. Yeah. And it isn't really his love of other people. It's, he still he's appealing to Victor, who still wants to be the man that she loved, that she married, like,
sure, yeah.
And that he wouldn't, and that this would be a bridge too far, even for all of the things that Mr. Freeze has already done in, in the first episode. So I think that's a really interesting way of him reaching there. And then even at the end, I really like Batman trying to force him to leave. He's like, I'm not going to stand here and let you die. Yeah. Like, you're killing yourself if you stay. And him forcing Batman's hand by freezing Robin. Like, I think that's a really interesting way of resolving that.
Clearly not. They didn't show the same care for Grant Walker.
That's true. They did just leave him
frozen to the...
Maybe there's like an iceberg breakup or something. They have to, like, run away. They get the doctor on, because they're up on the platform.
Yeah.
So I guess they don't jump down to try to save him. Maybe that happened off screen. That's a fair point. They don't necessarily do everything they can.
Yeah, maybe there was an implied barrier that they couldn't get through.
Because they... Or that it's just too late. Yeah. They feel at that point they're making the judgment call. But yeah, I think that's... that. I like that bit. We always talk about that, the value that Batman places on human life is such an important part of that character. So yeah, I think there's beats in here that still feel authentic. It doesn't feel like we just brought him back to bring him back because we wanted to use Mr. Freeze again. But and to your point, I do think it's better to try to do a completely different type of story than to try to do a sequel where he breaks out and tries to kill Grant Walker again or whatever. Right. It would just be kind of old hat at that point. And so yeah, I think I appreciate that they tried a big swing, even if the final result again is just this kind of weird, quirky episode with evil Walt Disney trying to freeze the Earth. Like it gets a little super frenzy in the last bit there, and they're fighting giant robots and stuff. So it's, like I said, it feels a little bit out of left field, I think, for this series, but it's a fun, quirky little story, I think, and it has, I think, moments that still appeal to me as for the Mr. Freeze character and for Batman as well.
All right, man, let's move on to our next category, which is going to be animation and visuals. And it's Dong Yang, once again, responsible for animation this week. And, of course, as we talked about at the top, our guest coming up here in just a few minutes, Mr. Kevin Altieri, was responsible for directing the episode, written by Paul Dini and Bruce W. Timm for this week's episode. So we'll get into some of the nitty-gritty here in just a minute with Kevin. As far as, some behind-the-scenes stuff. As far as the episodes look, I think most people look like their own model for the episode. There's some really good stuff here. We'll talk about some of the homages and maybe the influences where some of the robotics and stuff came from with Kevin. But as far as the episode itself, I think it looks good for what we needed. As we said, there's not a ton of action beats. The interaction with the robots, I think, is where most of your action is going to come in. I like, we remarked as we were watching the episode, the airplane turbine robots that are flying around.
Yes.
The surveillance robots. I love that they can be defeated just like you would in a video game. You just have to knock out the light. You got to avoid, dodge an attack, and hit them in the light. And that causes them to blow up. Very, very funny there. I think we already remarked, but the Grant Walker getting his own miniature, diminutive version of the Mr. Freeze suit is really funny. It's like significantly shorter, but it's still like exactly the same.
The dome isn't quite as symmetrical.
It looks more like the Lost in Space robot.
Yes,
if you look at the original Lost in Space robot from the original series, it's got that sort of dome to it. Very funny. I think that opening sequence is really impressive. From everything from the robot coming out of the water. We'll talk about maybe some homages to Fleischer Superman.
I was going to say that whole sequence feels exactly like how a Fleischer Superman short would
the Mechanical
open.
Monsters episode, that one where they capture Lois, that whole sequence, and I'm pretty sure that when we talked to Dan and Kevin previously, that they mentioned that Mechanical Monsters episode is a very strong influence. But
yeah, even as we might talk about with Kevin, not to get ahead of ourselves, but those Fleischer cartoons were very influential on some of the great anime works of the Ghost in the Shell and Akira and things like that, who then in turn inspired the people working on these series. So It's very sort of cyclical in how art and artistry inspires the next generation to kind of to keep going. So there's definitely some stuff in here that we can't wait to get into when we talk to Kevin. But
as far as anything else that stood out, I think the futuristic design of Oceana is pretty cool.
Cannon's neat.
Yeah, Ice Cannon is cool. And of course, there's 2 or 3 shots that are just absolutely iconic. One you pointed out was then reused for the opening intro for the Batman Superman Adventures intro for Kids WB later on.
That's right. Mr. Freeze walking through the doorway when Batman and Robin arrive in Oceana, and it's he gets kind of backlit by the light coming through the door, and then he just fires the freeze ray right into the camera, and you get the swirl of the ice as he's freezing Batman and Robin. It's a really, really great shot and really, really iconic. And again, burned in my brain because it was used probably in a lot of Fox Kids and Kids WB commercials as well, but definitely also in the new Batman Superman Adventures opening titles.
I think there's a similar, and it might be an intended or unintended callback. There's a scene in Heart of Ice the scene where Batman is doing his reconnaissance and sees how Mr. Freeze turned into Mr. Freeze. There's a similar shot where Mr. Freeze is standing in the door and sort of backlit that way also.
Move me to tears if I still had tears to shed.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yep. And there's one shot that's just a really great painted, again, very Fleischer Superman. Everything's painted except his eyes are animated. This bright red glow before he freezes Batman and Robin. So, yes.
Also something I noticed that I noticed at the time. Mr. Freeze has eyebrows.
Yeah.
He has little eyebrows that are going up and down over his goggles. Yeah.
The characters.
That's where a lot of his expression comes from, honestly.
Yeah. This episode, and I think maybe because that first episode, other than when he's talking about Nora I don't know that he has an opportunity in that other than maybe at the end for you to kind of emote in any other way.
Yeah.
He's pretty
He's doing
stern.
a lot of frowning.
I was saying, he's pretty stern, angry, and mad. This one, he's got the opportunity to, especially when you get the reveal of Nora behind the curtain in the floaty tube. He kind of gets that shocked look, and those eyebrows allow him to emote in that way. I'm speaking about something that we'll cover in the future, but I definitely know that comes into play in Sub-Zero also. There's a lot more expressive and emoting that he does with his facial features and stuff like that. But yeah, that is something that the expressions that a lot of the characters have. Him in that initial scene, he's not in the Mr. Freeze suit, so he doesn't have the same animated eyebrow look that he gets when he puts his goggles on, but there's some really great emotion that's done really well, because the point that they're trying to make is that he's showing fear in this scene.
Right.
But that whole scene where the robot climbs up the side of the wall and peeks through the glass, and you kind of get this, this reflection and the light, you can almost get a lens flare type effect of him peering through, and Mr. Freeze. It's very like horror. It's a horror movie scene. Like Mr. Freeze is just kind of like Victor's like backing up, and he's trying to call for the guard as the robot is breaking in and can't do anything. He's eaten by the robot. Is essentially horrifying. But yeah, lots of great stuff here. So I guess without further ado, so we don't take up all the goodies, why don't we throw it to ourselves in the future to talk about this episode, Deep Freeze, with our special guest correspondent, the returning director of this episode, Mr. Kevin Altieri. Thanks, selves from the past. We are, of course, here once again with the wonderful, like we talked about this the last time. He's been on so often. We might as well get him. He should get a credit in the podcast.
He's sick of us. Let's be honest. But
he's graced us with his presence once again to talk about cartoons from 30 years ago. But of course, he has a reason to do that, because his name is attached to it, and that is, of course, we're joined by the great director of this week's episode, Deep Freeze. That's right, returning once again as a special correspondent, Mr. Kevin Altieri. Kevin, thanks again for coming on the DCAU review with us.
Oh, glad to be back.
That's right.
It's a pleasure. Don't worry.
Well, we're talking about a very interesting episode here today, and that is the Deep Freeze episode. We have an episode here that brings back an iconic character that was really defined in this show with the Heart of Ice episode. And many people look at that Heart of Ice episode as sort of a perfect story kind of encapsulated there. So the decision to bring him the Mr. Freeze character back, I'm sure, was one that was bandied about. But do you remember anything about like the decision making? Obviously the story was maybe written by Bruce and Paul for this episode, but what went into the process of kind of bringing this character back from that little self-contained episode that was kind of a little perfect little encapsulated episode in and of itself?
Well, it kind of came about because it's like, as everyone now knows, it's like we were having the original story editor, we were having trouble steering the show away from Saturday morning simplicity, and just, going a more silly route. Whole show. So there was a period where we were just getting one bad script after another, and they were getting tossed out. And I really, really wanted to do Mr. Freeze, so, and of course that script, Heart of Ice, it's like, I read all the scripts and I'm like, oh boy, like I'm going to be working on it. And it's, of course, Bruce, no, that's mine, It was a hell of a good script. I loved it. And then I love that version of Mr. Freeze.
Yeah.
And the thing that I saw of I'm going to go back again.
Yeah.
We're getting bad scripts. So we were encouraged, the directors were encouraged to do outlines and submit them. And there was like some outside writers were also doing this, but I really wanted to do Mr. Freeze. And the thing about that I got out of that show, Heart of Ice, was I just saw the idea in my head and I wrote an outline
Mm-hmm.
which harkens back to the Fleischer brothers.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to use elements of the Fleischer brothers, and yet I also wanted to have Mr. Freeze go on with the whole revenge thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, suppose Vincent Price was playing Mr. Freeze,
Mm-hmm.
and you do the whole Dr. Phibes thing.
Mm.
So he's there, and he's a villain in his lair,
Mm-hmm.
which I had is this underwater lair, which comes from, I think it was the electric earthquake.
Okay.
Remember the earthquake episode?
Oh,
where
yeah,
the
yeah.
guy had his lair in the Metropolis Harbor underwater.
Mm-hmm.
So I had an underwater lair, and it's like I just because I wanted to do those elements,
Sure.
and then I wanted him. He's in his lair, and as he's talking to Nora, she's
Mhm.
just a frozen entity floating in
Mhm.
in the tube.
Yeah.
And he just talks to her the same as Dr. Phibes would just talk to, Carolyn Monroe, who's just laying there,
Sure. Yeah.
in the
Wow.
Dr. Phibes movie. So that's where I got that. And the thing I had at the beginning of it was where he gets broken out of prison
Mm-hmm.
by the Freeze robots.
Mm-hmm.
But the Freeze robots I had in my story, they were his invention. And it was
Gotcha.
it just took that period of time for the robots to leave the lair and walk across the harbor.
Sure.
By the shoreline. It took a couple of months.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Distance, and then breaks him out of the prison the way that we have in Deep Freeze.
Sure.
But that was my whole thing. And then the ending where I had the whole place collapsing and
Mhm.
water was like rushing in and stuff. And you think, is that the last we've seen of Freeze? I don't know, but we'll find out. I doubt it. But then his head pops up, and I had the cryogenic head thing, which actually being done.
Wow.
So I was saying, it's just his head. The rest is just a robot.
That's great.
And he's like this, he's like a robotic expert too.
Yeah.
That was my original outline.
Wow.
So
Okay.
that was done, and Bruce liked it, and he submitted it. And of course, the story editor was like, "How dare you? You're just a director." And it's like, they did not like it at all.
Wow.
But Paul and Bruce did. But then, of course, the story that we have with the introduction of Grant Walker,
Yeah.
and it's not an underwater lair,
Right.
but it is like Epcot Center,
Right.
in the harbor, and it's so all these elements. It should be something built on piles, but when it explodes at the end, we actually have it sink.
Right.
Yes.
So I guess it was actually kind of like an island.
Yeah.
That-
Okay. Makes sense. Yeah. And then it sort of reverts to its own version of Atlantis at that point once it sinks.
But the robots and the robots breaking into the prison and everything, it's like that's all just me like wanting to do like all the Fleischer stuff.
I was going to ask about that because I believe it's the Mechanical Monsters Superman Fleischer brothers where Lois gets captured in a very similar way and then the robot flies off. And so there was elements there and we talked about this when we were doing the actual episode, but you and Dan have both talked about on our show, like the cyclical sort of nature of like Fleischer inspiring so many of the great Japanese artists that did some of the great stuff that then went and inspired you guys that you guys took elements from and were inspired. So it's just the cyclical nature of how artwork happens where you have people that are just homage the greatest stuff and take little bits and pieces, but then make their own masterpieces out of it.
Yeah, and me writing that outline and taking all the Fleischer stuff was basically just us, me, Bruce, Dan, Boyd, Frank. We're like hitting these scripts, Fleischer, because that was what was told me when I first got the job was like, Gene McCurdy and Tom Ruger, they wanted to do an homage to the Fleischer brothers. They wanted Batman to be like that level.
Yeah.
That was our inspiration. That was everyone's inspiration, except for the writers. At the time. Now, and then coming in when Alan Burnett ended up taking over, and Paul Dini really came, and Paul came in as another story editor.
Yeah.
You didn't have to tell them we're doing Fleischer Brothers.
Right.
They just write that way anyway. It's like they taken it. It's, I mean, especially Alan Burnett. I don't really think he was that influenced by the Fleischer Brothers.
Right.
Yeah.
He just has stories that he wants to tell, and he's just really clear.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like someone picking up a guitar and just like kind of listening. It's like, okay, I can play this. I hear the tune you guys are playing. Yeah. So the other part of the story we wanted to get into, the evil Walt Disney of Frank Walker. That's kind of this strange urban legend, right? That Walt Disney wanted to freeze himself and live forever and all that.
Yeah. Well, it's like it wasn't that because when Walt Disney died, I think that happened just because everyone felt like, oh no more Disney, and it's like, no more of these movies. And so there was like just that urban myth, the hope that Walt Disney can come back. Yeah, no, it was never, yeah.
Was there anything, I know that there was sort of a bit of rivalry corporately at the time between Warner Brothers and Disney as far as the animation department.
Oh, yeah.
Was there any sort of like little jab that like, hey, we're gonna make fun of, we're gonna kind of like needle Walt? Yeah, like
more like a spear thrust. In a strange way, that's like the origin of
it's crazy. Absolutely.
Deep Freeze was that the script was that's the kind of Deep Freeze is like that kind of script that Paul and Bruce came up with, and yes, they entertained ideas that I had in my original outline.
Right.
But they remembered it, and they liked it. They liked that idea, so
why didn't you get a writing credit then if you did the outline?
I mean, because it's not really my story.
Okay. Too much was changed at that point.
Yeah, the things that are still there. It's like he's not Dr. Phibes in this.
Right. Fair.
He's not out for revenge anymore.
Right.
He's just going to walk away from Walker. But the things that I did that stay there, and it's like I can't say it was like my writing.
Sure.
But now Nora is there.
Right.
But she's just what motivates him to stay and do the work for Grant Walker.
Right. Yeah.
And it actually has, instead of him being the Dr. Phibes kind of character and her being a reason why he can monologue. And it's not, I mean, it's creepy, but it's not weird. You understand, like he's kind of gone insane at this point. And he's out for revenge against all the things that have made the world this way. And Nora Freeze, again, she's not coming back. She's dead.
Right. She's just floating in that water.
Yeah, well, she is preserved, but she was preserved in Heart of Ice too.
Right.
But this is, but I just saw her like floating in fluid, and it's
so
just,
good.
That image is just, well, it's like I don't really need this story credit,
right?
Because the story is Paul and Bruce.
Sure.
It's their story. I wouldn't have come up with Epcot Center. That wasn't me. That was them. And I was like, oh, that's so good. That's
right.
This is a good idea. And they used my idea of the mechanical monsters. These robots breaking them out. But it's totally different than what I was going to have them do. The breakout. And they just played to the things they knew I wanted to draw.
Right. Well, I would say that's a pretty good segue. What do you remember about both the character designs? Obviously, we just talked about for a period of time. The Grant Walker's influenced by Walt Disney, but some of the I think the interesting things that we looked at as we're watching this episode again is the robots themselves. There's like 3 or 4 different types of robots. You have the main one that we mentioned was sort of based off of the mechanical monster type design with the little opening that he puts Mr. Freeze in. Those are used. But then you have these ones that sort of look like, to me, they look like airplane turbines that are flying around with the lights.
With arms.
Yep. That's all kind of like a cross between Orson Welles. H.G. Wells' Shape of Things to Come. You know, that super Art Deco look that, you know, that movie had. The giant screens, you know, the vast space. Oceania.
Yep.
The whole look of that is all Shape of Things to Come.
Okay.
And then the designs themselves that's kind of just going along with that whole Art Deco look.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's like they're just like, it's just what a great idea, you know.
Absolutely.
A lot of that was like, I think Troy Adamitis did a lot of that, the board of that section, with Oceania, with them fighting with the robots.
Oh yeah.
The flying robots.
Yes.
I don't know how much design wise, but the staging of that is pure Troy.
Wow.
You know,
and
Mike Goguen did the whole stuff with Rossum.
Okay.
I mean, that's a pretty fun scene with a lot of Easter eggs.
Yeah.
And I go, when the animation came back, and again, I think this show has some of the best animation.
It's really good.
It's really impressive.
It's friggin' rock solid all the way. I'm not gonna
especially for Dong Yang, right? That you talked about could be inconsistent.
Yeah. This, but then you go and you look at like the opening, the Freeze robots, and I'm sitting there because I boarded that myself, and I want that to be the. And it's like, it's really good. It's really good animation. But you look at where they put a lot of the effort. That little crab I have, that's just something that's there to add a little life to it, so you're not just looking at sand.
Right.
Boy, the animator, they got their best animator on that crab. On the robot. Well, he jumps in the air, does a take, and turns off. It's like he's just supposed to scuttle out of the way. But no, he's like full personality. And then they did that whole breakout was like with standard good Don Yang animation. That was good. And then you get to the Carl Rossum sequence. And it's like the best TMS guy. I recognize the work.
Wow.
This guy worked on Studio Ghibli stuff. It's got Squash and Stretch. That Batmite has like the best animation of the entire Batman the Animated Series. They throw everything they got into Batmite.
Yeah, when he floats up and like gives Robin the kiss on the cheek and all that, like it's so cartoony, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, and that's all drawn by Mike Goguen, and he was like, "Really, I got to do the cute stuff." I know, I'm sorry, but you just do it so well, and he does. I can say, "Really, I got to put the cat in there too."
It's like we get Mr. Mixie Spitlick, you get Streaky, you get Crypto, lots of fun.
All of them are there, and for the amount of animation that you just look at that sequence, they're doing nothing but sitting on the floor, being like facsimiles of E and Crypto, and the animation is just marvelous.
Yeah, really good.
Just on those.
I mean, everything else in that scene too, because it's what, maybe like a minute long or a minute and a half, and Rossum for the most part stands mostly still, but all these characters around him are moving. The robots, they're bringing chairs and they're bringing the ottoman, and he's sitting down and handing him a drink, and
the animation is just wonderful on that. I mean, and that's not to say that it's not wonderful in other parts of the show,
of course,
right?
Because and then when Mr. Freeze arrives at Oceania. Again, Don Yang is not very good at vehicle stuff. So I can complain about how the robots move, or how the robot going through the water like the torpedo, or how the bat boat's animated.
Sure.
That could all, none of that matches, you know.
Right.
It doesn't match Batmite.
Right.
The explosions and stuff are not Batmite level.
Oh my gosh. We're grading on a scale of 1 to Batmite.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah.
Oh no, but I mean, my God, when he goes, I just want to help, and it's like you go, oh my God,
And the head pops
Like,
off.
we were talking about how everything kind of comes together, like the voice performance, the music that kind of starts to skip as he starts to malfunction, like,
Yeah.
and then the head popping out and all that. Like, it's incredible. It's a great little gag.
Yeah, and I got like a great compliment from Shirley Walker on that, because before you actually do the music, she'll actually spot it with everyone. And I boarded the opening, and the whole thing is you have music, 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 and they're talking about music, and here, and it'll get big, and then we're inside the cell, and the music's building and building, and I break into the conversation. I wasn't even in the room. I just heard them because I was in the office next door,
Right.
and I go, pardon me, but music, music, music. Then when we're inside the cell, silence. And then the explosion happens, and that starts the music box.
That's
And she goes, oh, yes, wonderful. Thank you for clarifying that. Yeah. So when he gets captured, it's like,
Well, it's
know,
funny. We talked
talked
about
about the
that when we
music.
were
That
talking
was-
about the music.
yeah.
That's that scene. First of all, that whole opening scene. There's no, except for the guards a couple of times with fire, or there's no real dialogue. Freeze's only response is like, interesting. And then once it's almost like a horror movie type element of the robot climbing the wall, peeking through. You get the lens flare of the light, Freeze looking terrified and like trying to escape from his cell. So all of that, but the music box kicking off that scene with like playing the Mr. Freeze theme as a music box organically in the scene was done. Oh, it was so good. Perfect.
no, it's like at that point, like everyone was like working so well together. You know, we were actually a really good team.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And and the other thing is like where the animation when Nora Freeze is revealed, and I'm gonna say this, and it's gonna sound stupid, but while I'm drawing, like especially the ending with where's Mr. Freeze, what's described in the script is not exactly what I drew.
Okay.
The iceberg floating away is kind of my idea.
I love
Him
that.
kneeling there and just him touching her hand, but he can't touch her hand.
Yeah.
No, he'll never feel her again, but he loves her.
Yes.
And it's like, while I'm drawing it, I'm just choked up.
Oh,
I'm getting
Oh,
goosebumps.
it's like tears are welling in my eyes when I'm drawing that. At that very end, it's like you can't just clap.
it's tragic. Yeah, it's
so
tragic, and we talked about this. So, and this is a good segue to a question that we had for you. But like, obviously, we talked about the Mr. Freeze, the sort of the way that his story eventually plays out. From here, he turns into he's more robot than human after this. He becomes just the head on the spider body.
Yeah.
And then eventually,
that is my fault, but
I was going to say that was you put the idea in his head. Yeah.
But the idea that he's becoming less and less human as like the further away that he gets from Nora, from that. And then ultimately it leads to the story that they end up telling in the Batman Beyond episode, where he gets his body restored, but then ultimately he just cannot escape tragedy. Like his life is just a tragedy that plays out, and he ends up seeing his life as a tragedy. Like that arc, the story arc for that character, as far as how it turns out, how do you like? That feels pretty poetic to me. That's and he ends up not being able to be saved, and he sees himself as just this tragic figure that's doomed for a life of sadness or a life ending in tragedy.
Yeah, for my part, well, I kind of agree with Paul because Paul said, yeah, no, Nora's deader than a doornail. No, I mean, and it's that because once she's revived or once she's out, it's like, what's his motivation? What's going on? It's like, so Mr. Freeze becomes a difficult character.
Mm-hmm.
After you make, like, because of this episode, you establish that Nora is there.
Mm-hmm.
That is like, he doesn't care. He preserves himself. He creates like this iceberg that will survive the cataclysm that Oceania goes through.
Mm-hmm.
It's just about him and just about Nora.
Right.
He can live forever. He's like, there's nothing else. Does he have to eat,
Right.
or anything? No.
Right.
But he's, this is the best that he can do.
Yeah.
And it's, and then when you take him out of that, it kind of ruins it for me.
Yeah.
Even though I take credit for like the idea of the head,
Yeah.
But I mean, but actually, in saying that and about when they revive Nora and don't do anything with her, it's like all of a sudden the character falls apart for me.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm not saying that he isn't well done, and I'm not disagreeing with your story arc, because it does make sense.
Yeah.
It is well written and well done.
Yeah.
So speaking of this episode, we've talked a lot about the visual side of it, the story side of it. As far as the recording process here, you have, of course, Michael Ansara returning as Mr. Freeze, as well as Mr. O'Harely as Grant Walker. Not a huge cast otherwise. So, what do you remember anything from the recording sessions?
Oh, it was just great. I mean, Michael Ansara, I don't even think. I don't know. I mean, it had to have been. I don't even remember if that was like. It seems like that's the only voice anyone was like thinking of.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was Paul or Bruce or me, or Andrea.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't even remember anyone else being thought of or cast.
Yeah.
It's just he's just the perfect voice.
Yes.
We talked about also for this episode. So Mr. O'Hurley, we like reading his IMDb page, seeing he was an Oscar nominated actor for Robinson Crusoe, like one of those classically trained actors. And we've reviewed enough of these episodes where you can cast somebody, or you can cast somebody as a voice actor, and they may be an on-screen good actor, but sometimes that doesn't always translate to voice acting. But in this case, and I think maybe it speaks to the direction from Andrea, but the performance that he gives, because he's juxtaposed against this cold, lifeless, emotionless character, almost had to be like a thespian style, like over the top. And he just absolutely comes across as like a perfect foil for this Mr. Freeze character and this evil billionaire.
Yeah, no, I believe that had to have been Andrea's casting. But once she said it, it's like, oh, the guy from RoboCop.
Yep.
Perfect.
He's exactly the right age and had that just like, it was just such a good voice, a good choice.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't have thought of him myself.
Yeah, he's so matter of fact talking about like, well, everyone's going to die, but they're gonna do it to themselves anyway. Like,
and just his delivery is so good. It's like, just where, you can count free will with that, and he's like, pardon me, but I don't see the problem with that.
Right.
He doesn't give a shit. It's like he's so I'm right, and that's all there is to it.
Yep.
Not that there's any political people nowadays that match that.
There's never any real world implications that you can point to.
Cartoons, comic books, there's never any themes or messaging or homages.
Certain candidate, watching the cartoon and copying it.
Sometimes it feels the famous line is art imitating life, right? Or vice versa. I think sometimes life imitates art. So
but then the wonderful thing about this, and again, they should never have brought Grant Walker back in the comics.
Right.
No. He's underwater, frozen, living for eternity.
Agreed.
Trapped.
This was he wanted immortality. This is his punishment for being an evil person.
Right. This is the Twilight Zone ending, right? He gets what he wished for.
Him showing up later on, it's like, no. But again, I think it was either Burchett or Parobeck. I can't remember who drew that. It's like, it's all well done.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Good stories.
But I was just like, no. Get away. He doesn't get away with it. He doesn't escape. I mean, I know you want to bring guys back.
Sure.
Right.
But I mean, but it's like, Grant Walker should be just trapped forever.
In my mind, the canonicity of some of the tie-in comics is always in question because of the contradictions, and the hierarchy of what happened on screen tells me that Grant Walker is still floating someplace in his iceberg out in the middle of the harbor, suffering, watching that little sequence where the fish swims by and he looks at it and then screams. Perfect.
Because he knows what's going to happen.
Right.
Mm-hmm. That's the thing is, like, if he's frozen in ice and stuff, and it's like, well, that also makes it difficult to find him.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's like, they're not just going to go and excavate, which the comic has. Of course, they just excavate the ruins of Oceania, and there he is.
Right. I also, it's also great to what you already spoke about with Freeze, the contrast of Walker being dragged kicking and screaming to the depths of the ocean, whereas Freeze, he's got Nora, he could float there forever. Like there's a piece to that scene, even as tragic as it is when he reaches for her. Like this is all he wanted ultimately, was to be close to her again.
Yeah. And it's like, and there's the question of her being revived. I think that, at that point, he knows that Grant Walker's just lying.
Right.
Because there was no effort, it's like, well, let's just get started about destroying the planet. Please, everybody.
Right.
Now. It's like, it's not a question of like, well, you're going to live forever like I am. How about my wife?
Right.
Like, no. He's just, suit yourself. And the change in attitude once he's in the Freeze outfit with the super strength and everything, change of his attitude is, this is who he is all the time.
Right.
It seems kind of nice when he was an old guy that was infirm.
Right. But he's actually
one of the best lines. Paul wrote just a magnificent line. It is like, old and infirm as you are, I'd trade 1,000 of my frozen years for your worst day.
Yes.
It's like, that's just good writing, man.
Mm-hmm. Yep. He just knows that he knew that character so intrinsically. Kevin, thanks so much. We talked a lot about this episode today. A lot of fun talking about the production and everything, and some great behind the scenes stories of how things came together. We appreciate you spending some time with us. We'd be remiss before we head out, not to mention you're still out and about. We talked about it before we went on the air, but you're doing the circuit. You're doing some stuff. We talked about you're doing LA Comic Con, we believe, coming up here just in a couple weeks.
Yeah, I'll be at LA Comic Con. I think right now, I'm going to be there with Heroic Fine Arts.
Okay.
And me, Dan Reba, and I believe Brad Rader too.
Oh, very cool.
A whole Batman
Amigos back together.
That's right.
I haven't talked to Brad about it, but I believe Brad's going to be there too.
Well, we love that. I know Heroic Fine Arts has been doing a lot of stuff with both you and Dan, so you guys are on the circuit with them. So we do our best whenever we see that you guys are going to be at a show to share that with our listeners. But make sure you guys are following Heroic Fine Arts. Kevin's on Instagram, Altieri Arts. I know you post your commissions and stuff on there, and
Yeah. And on Facebook.
And on Facebook too. He's on Facebook too. Look him up, Kevin Altieri. So check that out, Kevin. It's been a blast as usual. Thanks again for coming on, especially on short notice.
I'd say we did it to you again. We promised we wouldn't do it, and then we gave you like 3 days notice again.
Next,
at this point, I expected. So
that's right.
Yep.
Look forward to having you on again in the future, hopefully.
Oh, yeah, my pleasure. I'll come back.
Thanks. You heard it here. We didn't scare him away this time, guys.
Oh, I'm not scared.
That's right. Well, thanks. Appreciate it, Kevin.
You're welcome.
Man, what a great time.
Absolutely.
You know, it's great. Whenever we have Kevin on, we know that there's going to be... He will not have an absence of things to talk about.
So there's no awkward silences with Kevin. He's a great storyteller and always has a lot of insight on his own inspirations and elements that he brought himself to the script that maybe weren't there on the page before he and his team worked on the storyboards and things like that. So always a blast talking with Kevin.
Yeah, so I guess we can give our scores, Liam, for the episode. So, like I said, everything looks really great. I think the sequence with the bat boat is really fun. I think that the sequence that we get, honestly, the heartbeat is the scenes with Mr. Freeze at the end. You know, with him, both with the destruction and him literally walking into the room as the world is crashing down around him, and he just goes to be with Nora. And then that final sequence of him, just the silhouette of him standing there with his hand up against the up against the cryogenic freezing chamber, and as the Mr. Freeze theme sort of plays them out, is really, really great. So I ended up giving animation visuals an 8 out of 10. I think it's really strong. There's a lot of interesting stuff, despite not having a ton of action. I think it really pays off with the way that everything looks for the episode. What about you?
Yeah, I gave it the exact same score of 8 out of 10. Can't really add much to what we've already talked about, but yeah, it's just the creativity of the design. You're designing a whole city, another whole city, and as well as the robots and everything we've already talked about with ourselves and with Kevin. So yeah, really, really strong job, even if it's not a traditional, not a lot of fisticuffs, but yeah, some fun stuff all around, and a really impressive job by the background and character design teams.
Absolutely. All right, Liam, let's move on to our next category, which is going to be music. The late, great Shirley Walker responsible for this week's music. And I came to a realization, Liam, as we were preparing for this, is despite the fact that there have been 4 volumes, originally there were 4 volumes of the Batman the Animated soundtrack, and then subsequently they re-released some of those same tracks on smaller soundtracks. Episodes for these last several episodes never released, and it's very frustrating.
Yeah, we get up to like Shadow of the Bat, and then there's like almost nothing after it. I feel
crazy.
Crazy. Yeah, it's frustrating to.
The good news is, though, we learned this week that after a long time, they're finally releasing a second volume of the Batman Beyond soundtrack.
Yes. So hopefully that's at least the entire 26 episode second season, if not.
Sounds like a lot of music is coming out based on we saw that from Christopher Carter this week on Twitter X. So hopefully one day we'll have the ability to listen to all of these songs and compositions in their isolated glory. But for this episode, it's interesting because initially with the title card we get the same sort of Heart of Ice soundtrack, but then it deviates from that as we get this opening scene, and it's a bit chaotic, as we've talked about, with this robot storming this beach and walking through this razor wire, and it's very quickly a scene of chaos and disorder that creates a lot of horns and sounds, and it works perfectly. It's interesting. I asked you, I was like, I wonder if when Ms. Walker was composing, if she had the ability, if she was listening to a fully completed like animatic that had sound effects and dialogue and she wrote along with that, or if she's simply watching the completed animation without any sound, because the thing that kind of impressed me was that there's all this noise and stuff that's going on. There's sirens going off, there's guns, there's explosions, and she had to write music around all of this stuff that didn't in any way conflict with what was happening on the screen.
Right.
Obviously, she's writing, she knows to write. I assume she has some sort of visual that she's writing with to know the high points and low points, but like, if she didn't have the benefit of having some of the sound effects added, if they were added afterwards, man, what a difficult thing to do. But it works perfectly for that opening scene. Like, it feels very, the composition is done really well. I do like that the music box, I pointed out, plays. So the music box is in Mr. Freeze's jail cell, and it clicks on because of some of the vibration, and it begins to play a sped up version of the Mr. Freeze theme from Heart of Ice.
We don't. It's funny because I remember just watching this right before we came on the air here, hearing the Mr. Freeze theme in that theme, but not necessarily doing it until we went back a second time to kind of listen for specific music cues. And yeah, it's literally just when he's in the cell you hear the theme because it's coming out of the music box. So it's a really, really clever.
Which makes sense now because the final, like, it kind of changes that final scene of Heart of Ice for me, because he's sitting there with the music box, and you're thinking that it's just the soundtrack, but it's also the music that plays. So just an extra layer that gave me a little goosebumps. Pretty fun. But then, of course, like the rest of the episode, we have some action beats that are played. The reveal of Nora sort of has this gigantic, tragic love story crescendo to it. Once he realizes that Nora may or may not be alive, she's in this cryogenic freezing chamber still. And then, of course, the action beats that occur with the robots, discovering Batman and Robin and their subsequent fight there. And then the appeal to Mr. Freeze has some good sort of subtle music in the background as he's appealing to Freeze's humanity, as we talked about. And then I think of course, the maybe the most memorable part is that final sequence that we get at the end after everything has been destroyed from Oceana. You get Batman delivering this final monologue about Mr. Freeze and potentially his return, and you see the iceberg float past, and then perfectly, here comes the Heart of Ice. The Mr. Freeze theme comes in and plays over as we get this iconic image of him kneeling before the tube. So really, really good. I like that Miss Walker chose to not heavily rely on that theme, except for the parts that it really called for, which just I feel like speaks to the genius of who she was and the choices that she would make in her musical compositions.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't add a lot to that. I was really impressed with the way they didn't overuse the Mr. Freeze. Like, I kept expecting it to come in during when everything's like blowing up in like a real dramatic orchestral way, but I think they kept away from it because it feels very, I think it allows that theme to feel very personal. Like it feels like it's almost like it's only a song that he hears when he looks at her or thinks of her. Like, so it becomes this very sort of intimate piece of music to me, so I think not doing the grand orchestral like we talk about all the time with the different ways they use the Batman theme, I think actually adds a little bit for this particular character. So I like that a lot. Also, I will just mention the Batmite music. He has like a weird kind of jaunty version. It's a little bit of the Shirley Walker Batman music, but it's just like, it's very jaunty and it kind of works because as the robot starts to malfunction and repeat itself, it almost sounds like the track is skipping because it just kind of keeps going back to the same note over and over again. The needle
is skipping over the record.
so they pulled off some pretty fun tricks there with the editing and the music there as well. So for all those reasons, I ended up giving music a pretty strong 7 out of 10.
I went a little higher. I went with a 9 out of 10 for mine. I think it perfectly fits. That that Heart of Ice, that Mr. Freeze theme is so good.
Absolutely.
And being able to tie it in organically with the music box, and then again just having that crescendo at the end. And then I think just some of the action beats that hit, as we mentioned, are really, really strong. So 9 out of 10 for me, 7 out of 10 for you. Not disagreement worthy, alarm worthy, but both still pretty strong scores.
Absolutely.
All right, Liam, let's. That brings us to our final category of the day, which is going to be voice acting. And, of course, we talked a little bit about that with Kevin before, but we'll go ahead and just kind of go through our list of actors here and talk about our opinions on their performances. Let's go ahead and review that voice cast.
That's right. Very quickly, we'll just mention in that scene with the returning Carl Rossum, we do have William Sanderson back playing that role once again. Of course, acted in the original Blade Runner movie from the 80s, so some parallels there with the character he plays here.
That's one of the fun things that we brought up in those previous appearances.
Mm-hmm. He only gets like 2 lines, but I think who steals the show is probably Pat Fraley as Batmite, who folks would probably know most famously as the voice of Krang in the 1980s, the original Ninja Turtles cartoon. That is kind of the one that still, I think, gets homaged and remembered the most, even if the 03 show is better. It's okay. It's all right. It's just because I was a kid when that one was on. That's all.
April Fool's 2025?
Maybe. We'll see. Yes, I think that's like I said, it's a very fun scene. It very much captures that type of like Great Gazoo type of just really over the top, shrill, high voiced cartoon character. And just getting to sneak that in again in one of the final few episodes of the series. It's one of those pieces of the Batman mythos that doesn't show up as often anymore, but it's still there was a 10 or 15 year period where he was in like every issue. So
he still pops up from
Yeah.
time to time. He's one of those interdimensional beings that still has a interesting cameo opportunity. I think I was questioning whether or not the commentary, the line that Rossum says about just wasn't ever able to get his programming right, whether or not that was some sort of meta commentary about if Paul Dini was desperate to get him into the show somehow at some point, because that feels a very, very much like a Paul Dini thing. Like he desperately wanted a Batmite episode.
Right. And later on he writes Mixed Pixelated, which obviously a very similar character. So.
There you go.
How about that? But yes, then we have our villains for the piece. We have Dan O'Hurley as Grant Walker. I think he's great. People would probably know him best as he's one of the sort of the shadowy figures in the corporation in the first 2 RoboCop movies. He's also in The Last Starfighter and several other films. Just great, just weird, crazy old man, but not crazy in a ranting, raving. Again, more I think of like a Bond villain, where he's very calm about everything. When he's announcing that they're going to kill the entire planet with ice, he's like, "Well, it's sad, but they were going to do it to themselves anyway." Like he's so matter of fact about how he's about to commit like the most heinous crime imaginable, and he's just so matter of fact about it all, and the way he sort of pleads very seemingly innocently for Mr. Freeze to do this for him, and how kind of quickly the switch flips when when it's clear Mr. Freeze isn't interested, of like, oh, by the way, I'm gonna kill your wife again if you don't do what I'm saying. Like that sinister side that kind of creeps out once he's in the mode, but it's very clear. Again, no real world parallels here with any billionaires that exist, but really enjoys like making people do things they don't want to do. It feels like, like, so that like really sinister edge to him when he sort of takes control, I think he gets to do a lot here for a one-off guest star here.
Yeah, he clearly a very classically trained actor. He's able to emote very well through his dialogue. I think what works really well, we didn't talk about it as much when we did visuals, but we did mention that a lot of the characters here are very dynamic in their expressions. His performance, I feel like, influenced the way that the character himself emotes, because it's very, like the expressions that the character makes are very over the top and very like, It's very expressive. He's a Oscar-nominated actor for Robinson Crusoe in the 1950s. Beat out Orson Welles for a role. Like, that tells you, like, the acting chops that this guy has. So the fact that he was able to then translate that to voice acting, as we've talked about, it's not always an easy thing to do. Some of the greatest actors of our time have been credited with voices in the DCAU, and we're like, ooh, that wasn't as great as I would expect from that person.
Yeah.
So, the fact that he was able to do that and come across that way, I think it's just a testament. Again, we always talk about giving kudos to Andrea Romano whenever we can, but the fact that she was able to bring out performances in people that were clearly already talented, but bring them over to this world where it's less about visual acting. Maybe they weren't as comfortable or well versed in this particular type of acting, but the fact that she was able to bring that out in a performance like this that required him to he's juxtaposed against the coldest, driest character that you possibly can have for the majority of the episode. So it says a lot. And
that's a good segue into talking about Michael Ansara, returning here, of course, as the voice of Mr. Freeze. Mr. Ansara, probably best known, I think he plays the same character across like 3 or 4 different Star Trek series. Over the years, and quite a bit of other work to his name. Tremendous.
Yep.
See Heart of Ice episode for a more, obviously he's more active in that one, but again, he, as we mentioned, does get to do a little bit more because those initial scenes where he's in the prison, and then at the end when Batman and Robin are kind of pleading with him to not, let this happen. And his and the reveal again when Nora is first revealed to him, and there's such like a vulnerability and softness in his voice when he sees her for the first time. So again, not as much probably total minutes of screen time or audio time in this one, but really solid job by Mr. Ansara once again.
Yeah, couldn't say much else that you didn't. He's really good. He's the voice of this character. Unfortunately, he passed away a little over a decade ago now, I believe. So it's unfortunate that we aren't still able to appreciate new performances from him. However, he just perfectly encapsulates the character. He's so dry. He's so cold. The only hints of humanity and warmth are in those interactions between him and his wife, who unfortunately can't hear him. So it's another great performance by Mr. Ansara.
Absolutely, and then we just have our dynamic duo once again to talk about. Lauren Lester as Robin and Kevin Conroy as Batman. It's not their episode. There's not a lot that they have to do. I think you get, again, as we've talked about, that ending little bit of Batman trying to plead with Mr. Freeze to come with them, and them sort of trying to plead with him to that Nora would hate him if he went along with this, I think is good. But otherwise they're there to give a little exposition about who Grant Walker is, what's going on, who's Mr. Freeze, all that stuff, and then say look out when the robots show up.
Right.
Like there's not a lot asked of them this week. They're along for the ride, and they successfully do this job, but there's not a lot to it for Mr. Lester or Mr. Conroy in this case.
Yeah, very very true. Their last little bit of dialogue that kind of bleeds over into our final visual is probably the most interesting thing, as they kind of discuss, what could become of Mr. Freeze in the future, kind of giving us that to be continued bit there. So, not a ton for either of them to do, but really not a bad performance by either person. So strong as they could be in their limited roles.
Absolutely. So with all that considered, I think off the strength of Mr. Ansara and Mr. O'Hurley, I still ended up giving O'Hurley. I still ended up giving voice acting a pretty strong 8 out of 10.
Yeah, I went just 1 point higher. I went 9 out of 10. I think it is really, really strong. I think the only thing you could have had, I don't know what you could have done differently, but maybe something that would have involved more of a Batman and Robin performance or something. Having them, I don't know. It's not to say anybody didn't perform perfectly or well. It's just that ended up giving it a 9 out of 10 just based on everybody's interactions. So still very strong scores. Nothing to sneeze at.
Absolutely.
All right, Liam, well, that will begin to wrap things up. So let's total up our scores here. So totaling everything up on my end, I end up with a 33 out of 40. What about you?
And I don't think this is quite disagreement alarm worthy, but I ended up a few points lower at a 29 out of 40.
I think we've talked enough about and know enough about Mr. Freeze's story arc for the DCAU to say this is a 2 thumbs up. Gotta watch this.
Absolutely. It introduces the fact that he's immortal, which becomes pretty important, and obviously introduces that Nora's still alive. There's other episodes, there's tie-in comics, there's movies, and other shows that are influenced by this episode. So it's a pretty important one, even if, conceptually you're like, well, I kind of wish they had left it alone. It's like, well, if you don't do this one, you do it. This one does a lot of heavy lifting to set up all the stuff that comes afterwards. So
that's right. All right, Liam. Well, that begin to wrap things up. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in this week. Don't forget, if you would like to support the podcast, there's several ways to do so. Follow us on social medias at DCAU Review. Join the conversation on Instagram and Twitter/X. That's where you can usually reach out to us. Let us know your thoughts on this episode. You can also support the podcast by checking out the show notes. Become a monthly supporter. We have several monthly supporters that help us out, giving of their hard-earned dollars each and every month to keep the podcast going. So we thank our monthly supporters for doing so, and you can join them by clicking on that link in the show notes. You can also check out the show notes for a link to our store, or head over to DCAUreview.com to check out our store. Pick yourself up a piece of merchandise if you want to support the podcast that way. You can, of course, also subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app and leave a 5-star review, especially if you listen on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Both of those are our main listening sources. If you listen on Apple Podcasts and you leave a little 5-star review with a little blurb on it and we read it on air, we'll send you a little thank you gift. So we're basically bribing you to leave us a review, and we are unashamed to do so.
Absolutely.
So help us, help you, help us, as we say. No, we don't say that, but I just said that. Liam, we are turning the page. One final review here in the month of September, one final episode of Batman the Animated Series, and it is a quite memorable one for a lot of different reasons, as we get the return of a specific character, and that's the name of the episode.
That's right. There's not a lot of ambiguity, as we'll be talking about Batgirl Returns, but she's not alone. We also get a returning villain, and it's a almost Batman-less episode. So. One of the few of this series. So, we got a lot to talk about, and it is officially, production order-wise, the end of the road for our original Batman the Animated Series reviews. So,
pour one out for us next week as we celebrate the end of the road for this original Batman run. And we'll discuss what we'll be doing after that shortly thereafter. So, it's going to be a good one. It's going to be sad. It's going to be a day of celebration. It's going to be a lot of stuff, Liam. Emotional roller coaster, no doubt. But until then, I'm Cal.
And I'm Liam.
And we'll talk to you on the next episode of the DCAU Review.
Bye-bye.